more about serrations versus non-serrations. I've been thinking about that since my last video. And I thought I'd start with your own kitchen. Everybody's got one of these. That's a serrated knife. And that knife is generally used for bread. I think that's a bread knife. The reason that serrations are good for bread is that bread is soft, requires very little pressure. If you put too much pressure on bread, it'll squish. So the serrations give a saw-like action, and for slicing, for a sawing type action, it actually requires a little less pressure because the serrations are very, very sharp and they act like a mini type of saw. You also have the plain edge knives in your kitchen, and those are used for almost everything else. The tomato, this is a kind of a little bit green, can be cut only by a very sharp knife. In this case, this is somewhat sharp, with a plain edge. If that was a squishier tomato, I might squish it before I was able to do that. So we use both plain edge and serrated edges in the kitchen for different uses. For this tomato, I might use a serrated knife if it was more ripe because it uses less pressure because that's got a sawing action and it would be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The plain edge can use more of a push cut because it's sharp. Once it gets going, you can almost push it through. So that's a little bit about that. On your hunting knife, I've got two examples here. I have one of the best hunting knife designs, I think. This is the Tim Wegner Spyderco. This is a plain edge. This has been well used. I've done 5 caribou at a time without resharpening with that knife. And this is the combo edge, which is a 60% serrated, 40% plain edge. And let's talk a little bit about serrations on an outdoor knife. This serrated knife is a Spyderco specialty. I think Spyderco really brought serrations to the outdoor knife industry. And what can serrations do better than a plain edge? What can plain edges do better than a serrated edge? I've got this little chart here that I wanted to use to talk about those things. And for me, I've thought about this. There's 6 tasks for processing an animal. There's skinning as a main task, disjointing, which is usually taking off the lower 4 limbs. There's gutting, there's quartering the animals, there's boning the animal, and there's caping the animal. And one of the things that Tim Wegner thought about is he thought about a tool that could do all of those things. And that's when he designed that knife, he thought about all of those things. He wanted something that would do everything, and there are certain design features in this knife that allows that to happen. So I want to talk about each of those things in turn. Skinning. So if I'm skinning, in this case I'm not going to skin an animal, I'm going to try to skin this carrot. I'm looking for a very precise action where I will start the skinning with the point. This was an animal. And I want to just lift a layer up. And the plain edge does that very well because the plain edge makes nice accurate cuts because there's only one angle to that plain edge that I have to worry about. When I try to do the same task with a serrated knife, you'll see that there's multifaceted here, and this is one of the advantages. You actually have about a 30% more cutting area with the serrated knife. You've also got these different geometries, and this is useful in some things. Skinning, not so much, because as soon as I try to skin, especially if I try to skin over a whole area, I've got multiple facets, and you can see I'm making a mess of that. I am not accurate because of the serrations. So for skinning, especially when I'm using that slicing action which I would use on an animal, I like worrying about that one plane here on the plain edge knife, not all of these edges. So if I'm trying to skin an animal, we could also try to skin this tomato. You can see when I try to skin it, it doesn't work too bad because it's sharp, but I'm not making an accurate cut because I've got all those different facets to worry about. So although you can do things with a serrated knife like that, you can see the scoring that's happening because that's not accurate. And when I don't want to go through the skin of an animal, I might want to save that skin. I want to have precision like that. That's one facet to worry about, not all these little score marks. So skinning, clearly, to me, the plain edge has got the advantage. Disjointing the animal. And for disjointing the animal is when demonstrating my elbow, perhaps, which is kind of gruesome. What I want to do is I want to cut around the tendons. I want to cut the cartilage so that I've just got the bone not separated, and I can cut off that. I can cut off that lower leg. So what I'm really doing is it's almost like cutting a rope. And in this case, when I'm cutting a rope, a plain edge, if it's very sharp, will cut a rope nicely. A serrated edge has some advantages when cutting rope because it's a little bit sharper, the angle is a little bit steeper, and those multi-angles are now working in your favor, and I'm actually able to cut that a little bit easier and a little bit better with a serrated knife. So for disjointing is the one area where I believe the serrations have an advantage. For gutting, the task of gutting is similar to skinning. In this case, I'm going to be opening up the cavity of an animal, and I'm going to want to get that little point underneath, and I want to be able to open up that animal just like that. And that's what I'm doing on the abdominal cavity. Now with this combi edge, I can do the same sort of thing with gutting, but as soon as it slides into this area, if I start using that whole area, I start getting very, very rough cuts here, and these little points can start to stick. These little points will begin sticking. So in that case, for gutting, clearly to me, plain edge has a big advantage. For quartering, quartering the animal with a knife is, especially when you're using the gutless skinning method that native people use, is basically you're looking for, again, slicing through areas that have, you follow the joints along. It's a little bit different than disjoining because you're not looking at real tendon-rich areas. In that case, for me, you're doing a lot of meat cutting to go through when you're doing the hip. And for meat cutting, you're doing a much cleaner job. If I cut this moose meat here, unless it's cooked, if I cut that with a plain edge, you can see how smooth that is. That's how I want to leave the meat in the field. If I use that sawing action, you can again see I'm grooving that meat because of the multi-facets of the serration. So, you know, although you could quarter with a serrated knife, I believe that you're better off with a plain edge. Your other tasks are boning, and boning again is going in. If you're having to pack the animal out, you want to lighten it, so you're going to have to go in with your knife along the bone, and you're cutting meat. And again, because you don't want the snagging, you want nice clean cuts. Boning, there's no doubt to me that a plain edge is better. And caping, for caping, you're using almost entirely the point, and in those cases, if you've got a combination edge, both of these knives would be equal. So I'll call caping a wash, although it is the plain edge of the combi knife that you're going to be using. You would not want to use a fully serrated knife to cape, because again, you'd be catching different things. You'd be, sometimes instead of cutting, these little points will catch things that are soft and get a bit tangled up. So for me, the plain edge is a much, much better design. The combination edge seems to have, you would seem to think would have the best combination of both, as done by Spyderco. It's too aggressive, it's too saw-like. These things catch too often. The only time this is useful is in disjointing, and even then it only has a slight advantage. So for me, as far as a hunting knife, this Spyderco, even the combination edge, takes a back seat to the plain edge.
Thank you for watching my video. Have a good day.